Thank you. Okay, very good. How about opposition CLPHS? Are you guys here?
Opposition is here and complete.
Amazing. All right. So before we start the grand finals, I would like my panelists to introduce themselves in the order that they appear in tab. Let's start with Chengzu.
Hi, Chengzu, he can pronounce. Good luck for the round.
Farhan.
Hi, Farhan. To privilege to pronounce. All the best. Good luck.
We have Victor.
Hi, my name is Victor. Preferred pronounce him. Good luck with the round.
Sadiq. How about Sadiq Farhan? Are you here? Sadiq Farhan. Okay. How about Shafiq Raza?
Hi everyone, my name is Shafi Reza. He, him, gender pronoun. Good luck for everyone.
And Wesley.
Hi, Wesley, he, him, gender pronouns. No, all the best for the round.
Okay, I'm still missing one panelist. Sadiq Farhan, are you here? Farhan Sadiq, are you here? Okay, I'll just try to find him in this one. So while this is happening, I am your chair. Hi, my name is Leah. I'm really happy to be chairing this high school finals. So congratulations for both teams that you guys made it this far. You guys are really good debaters. Congratulations for all the effort and things like that. So I hope that this will be a very good round. So give me us 1 sec as we try to find the other panelists, Sadiq Farhan.
Yeah, OC has been notified as well, so we're looking for him.
Okay, great. So before we do start, just some general reminders. The first is, I think, please keep a timer by yourself. So I will be also timing you in my personal timer, but I will not be able to send timestamps. So it is important that you guys be mindful of your time, because anything that you say beyond the allocated time will not be credited in the adjudication or in the weighing of a decision. So try to always hold a timer, right? Sadiq Farhan, are you here? Okay, he's still not here. So let's give him like 5 minutes to come here, given that that's the disconnection policy, and then we can start. Okay, great. I think Farhan is here, so we can start. So welcome to the Novice Finals, High School Finals of MWSDES. Let's start with the motion. This House believes that national war memorials should commemorate the casualties on all sides of the conflict. Let's welcome Prime Minister. Here, here.
Okay. Hi. Checking if I'm audible.
Yes, you're audible and visible.
Okay, thank you so much. Sorry about the background noise. I'm in a public area, but yeah. My name is Rania. She, her pronouns, POIs, verbally, please. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. There is no heroes and villains in wars. They are only victims. By saying this, how does this commemoration of this implementation work on our side of the house, right? how does this look like on all sides of the conflict? Sorry about that. We are not only just, it is not only just our army that is in the war. It is also other people's armies, other countries' armies, but also note that civilian casualties are also involved in this, right? We do not want these civilians to simply get stomped on for no apparent reason when they are not the ones at fault, right? So how, like, let's take how people suffered during the Nazis, for example. I just want to make everything clear that we do not support Nazis. We're just using this as a rhetoric, right? So who suffered during the Nazis, when they took over the world, the people, the civilians and the victims were the ones that were suffering. They are the ones that are suffering just because of the certain party that was doing all this, right? And how does this affect us? How does this poor conflict affect the communities in, like, currently, right? Let's say that they are fresh out of conflict, right? And they've been agitated. When you're fresh out of conflict, you tend to get agitated, and every single thing that says or someone says that hints to you, you get extremely agitated, and you are fallen into this most vulnerable state when you develop an extremist mentality, right? Because they develop an us versus them mentality. And it also, we can just paint a picture like how it looks like when an anti-American sentiments coming from Iraq, right? This is like a great example. And then next, it also looks like the many ethnic wars happening in Africa just because of these racial tensions. Like, for example, the Sudanese in the Civil War. So these things that create an us versus them mentality just makes everyone as their enemies. This is the thing that could possibly happen to the victims because they did not want to be in this in the first place, right? Next, I'm going to be telling you my side government's framing, right? The opposition has to be clear which side they have to commemorate. For example, if they want to commemorate heroes or villains, or casualties, or even cats and dogs, right? So it's status quo, right? Since victims of war have the power to tell you what the war actually looks like, but then these victors are the ones that come in and tell you and intervene and tell you that they are the ones that are right. They are the ones that cause no harm when you are putting the victims' lives at risk, the victims being the main stakeholders, right? You allow the victims to choose. They are going to, when you allow them to choose, they are going to, of course, choose themselves. They are going to paint a picture where they are telling you that they are the ones that are right and the victims are the ones that are wrong. But in reality, the victims are the ones suffering and the victims are the ones that are actually right. Okay, because just like how America can paint themselves as the good guys just because they won the war. Again, I'm just using rhetorics, right? This brings me to my first argument on side government, right? Which is the principal argument on how we are able to protect the value of life. Everyone equally deserves the right to live. And if we are being stripped away of that right, how are we going to live a life full of quality, right? Because if these victors are the ones that come in and paint a picture where you are the victim and they are telling you things that opposes to what actually happened during the war, how will this immensely increase the quality of life? Let's take in the 50s, for example, the Batang Kali incident, right? Like there were 20 civilians who were dead. And then the worst you can do, and then all these civilians, when we reached out towards the UK, then the UK actually, to get reparations, right? But the UK said no. The UK said, because of the status of limitations that is too long, we cannot grant you any reparations. And how is that inherently good, right? On our side, we tell you that is not good. Next, how does war change this, right? You do not get consent to be born in a place where you do not want to. You do not get consent. Like I didn't get consent to be born in Malaysia, right? That's the example that I'm trying to paint here. So on the side of the world where it's very war heavy, how are you going to actually ensure that these victors are the ones that are not going to strip away of your right of freedom, like freedom of speech, basically, right? So we're here to tell you and point out that the war is inherently immoral. And when people deserve to live, the war actively infringes the rights of the people because they are now they're now living in the harm of them being able to live, right? So this directly proportionally infringes the right to choice. You know what I mean? Okay, so the first obligation here is to conduct reparations. But before I move on, are there any POIs? 3, 2, 1. Okay, moving on, right? Life without living isn't life itself. Why do I say this? Because if you're not allowing people to die, people who die in war to be remembered, you are stripping them away of their own dignity. How will you be remembered, and how would you like if you died in war and you weren't remembered? How would you like if your forefathers actually risked their blood, flesh, and tears to die in a war, and there are no forms of remembrance that each country is being put out to appreciate their sacrifices? This inherently, right, it just tarnishes their dignity as a whole. In their world, where victors get to decide who is right and who is wrong, they technically dictate the life of people. They technically do not care about how these people live, and they just care about themselves. That is exactly what I pointed out in my first layer of analysis as from the month. This actually directly proves that it is a moral harm, right? Because they are actively allowing the oppressors to take their lives away from them. And how is that inherently good is my question to opposition. If everyone equally deserves to live, everyone equally deserves the right to be remembered when they die. Moving on to my second argument, right, about reconciliation. We are trying to get together to admit whether war is bad, right? We are not pointing fingers and blaming people that they are the ones that are wrong. We want to acknowledge that war is someplace that people are going to die and they are going to have sacrifices, but we do not want the victors to come into place and say that the victims are the ones that are wrong and they are the ones that are right. We are not trying to paint that picture here. So the issue on this is that we do not force an us versus them mentality. We are saying that without a us versus them mentality, it is easier for countries to come together as a whole. It is easier for everyone to work together and not be like pinpointing each other's mistakes and causing a worldwide war, which we do not want, And so by doing this, right, we can actually focus on healing and show the human nature of empathy in our specific countries. I'll pass whatever remaining material I have to my second speaker, but thank you for now. Proud to propose.
All right. Thank you for your speech, Prime Minister. Now let's welcome the Leader of Opposition to give the flash.
All right, checking, am I visible and am I audible?
Yes.
All right, thank you. In which case, just for formalities, I am the Leader of Opposition for opposition bench today. Preferred pronouns he/they, verbal POIs, please. I'll be taking POIs after 3 minutes. Try not to badger. Thank you very much. All right. Without further ado, I'll be starting in 3. All right. I'll be starting in. Oh dear. Give me a minute. My dock is not functioning properly. All right. Starting in 3, 2, 1. They say that war is a game with no winners, and that loss of anyone is painfully reflected in the losses of loved ones on both sides of the war. The obvious issue therein is that even if your suffering exists on either side, would you glorify those who killed your partner? Would you glorify those who killed your friend? Would you glorify those who killed your father? Right? All right. I'll be doing 3 things in my speech today. Firstly, I'll be rebutting out the government case. Secondly, I'll be explaining why our side's arguments and impacts function. And thirdly, I'll be showing why all of these impacts and benefits that we get on our side are exclusive and why the harms are exclusive to side government. We have 2 paths to victory here. Firstly, we are going to prove to you that today that trust in the government will likely falter. But even if you don't buy that, we'll still tell you that citizens will still be harmed irregardless on their side of the house. Right? Starting off with rebuttals. First off, Prime Minister comes up and tells us these 2 arguments with incredibly unclear analysis on why any of it is true, right? They tell us from one point, okay, civilians don't want to suffer, right? They are the victims. Okay, sure, that's correct, right? And then they come on and tell us that victors are the ones that would claim propriety over like the authority of the situation. They would claim that they are the correct ones in like a morally ambiguous battle. Okay, sure, that's true, but what does that imply, right? And then they tell us some principle argument on how you're able to protect the principle of life, because apparently commemoration is the most important way of preserving life. I'm not sure how any of the analysis that government has given so far translates one another to another, where the gaps do not show us what the gaps do not show us clearly what is trying to be proven here. They also don't impact the arguments to the extent where we're able to properly engage. Either how, I'm going to tell you that the premise of their case here is the so-called us versus them mentality that causes peace issues. And I'm going to be rebutting that frontal, right? Two layers of this. Firstly, we tell you that, okay, sure, us versus them may be true, but the issue therein is that this exists on both sides of the house. You don't explain to us properly as a journey debate. You don't explain to us the process of how you achieve, how you abolish this so-called us versus them mentality. When the necessary characterization here that is true, which I'm going to provide right now, is that the us versus them mentality likely stems from antagonization or glorification during war, right? That's the entire point of war. There's winners, there's losers. That's what they want to frame. That's why there's propaganda, right? In that sense, the us versus them mentality is not so easy to remove, because imagine being indoctrinated to believe that the Russians are bad because they are communists, the Chinese are bad because they're communists, the Vietnamese are bad because they're communists, the North Koreans are bad because they're communists. Like throughout, like what would be nearly an entire century, right? That sort of indoctrination doesn't just go away because you commemorate some people on the other side, right? This is the issue that this is the issue that government's case doesn't really talk about, where the lack of analysis really comes into really harms the case here. Before I continue, the POI.
Okay, so isn't the us versus them mentality coming from the propaganda which then leads to war, not the war creating the us versus them mentality?
Right. First off, that's completely untrue. I'm not sure where that happened. A very clear example of this is the European sentiment, right? Let's look at Britain in like 1960, like 1066 as versus like the Norman French as the very first example in that incredibly long civil dispute, right? Was that propaganda between both countries at the point? No. Even if you tell me that, oh, it's not enough, it's not modern enough, when did Russian propaganda regarding how they're brutal and how they're violent stem about? How did the propaganda relating to the Japanese stem about, right? It's only during and after the war where things were shown, where propaganda really came about. It's not that propaganda causes war, it's that war causes propaganda and polarization in beliefs. All right, I hope that answers your POI. I'm not going to be continuing into my arguments, which is the principle of patriotism. We say that no patriotism equals as a lack of faith in the government. Three layers to this. First layer, why patriotism doesn't exist on government side, right? Commemorating the effects is for the sake of patriotism. You celebrate war heroes and those who died protecting your nation. If you were to celebrate other countries as well, think about it for a minute, yeah, you get less patriotism, right? War is long, mostly negative propaganda. War always has antagonism of the opposition force. This propaganda is likely to be like a general umbrella. It doesn't just say, oh, some are bad, but there are still good ones. It's more like World War II Germans being collectively called slurs like krauts and such in like bars and taverns. And a more modern example is Ukrainian war, with the mass spreading of media showing Russian brutality as a form of propaganda, right? It ingrains people to believe one opinion or another, and people get the prerequisite idea of what one side is and what one side is not. When you glorify these dead soldiers of an opponent, when after antagonizing them for an incredibly long period during the war, the contradictory stance that the state is taking will make it look like state supports the antagonist, right? Our second layer here tells you why patriotism is important. Patriotism is important to maintain a level of democracy, right? You must believe in the government to believe in the system. For democracy to function, there thus must be a level of confidence in the government. If the principle is breached, people lose trust in the government, democracy falls. That's on an extreme end. Speaking broadly and more realistically, people don't trust the government to make policies or legislation. The idea of representation in society falls apart, but governments will still continue to run. Third layer here, why government must be patriotic or at least maintain a patriotic image. War has a lot of dead soldiers who serve their country, right? Like war has dead people. That's quite obvious. These people belong to families that had close ones. Those close ones, like losing someone they love, will likely hate or actively depreciate on the people who killed them, i.e. the opposing force. Memorials and commemorative events serve as a reminder and justification to these people that one, their sacrifice was not in vain, and two, they had a value and gave their all to the state. This justifies the loss that they had. It serves as a way to render to justify the loss, right? When you take the opposing force and dedicate a memorial to them as well, this justification disappears. Imagine being a widow, like your husband was killed in the Iraqi war event, and then all of a sudden they say, oh, let's commemorate the Iraqi soldiers as well who killed your husband, right? It's completely unfair. You're antagonizing. They have nowhere to get emotions. It doesn't do justice to people who lost loved ones. Like the argument is debate winning is simply because we tell you on our side, we show you how side governments work is likely to look like android of lacking patriotism and people who have lost trust in the government from the sheer reason that the losses that they experience, the loss of friends, the loss of loved ones, or even just like strangers in general, the fact that you have lost a good portion of people from your country to an opposing force, even if the opposing force was not necessarily bad. Firstly, the propaganda that exists that has been indoctrinated is not likely to be able to remove on Gov side. Thus, fourth, you're not likely to have some sort of positive or rational view on that, right? Especially when it involves dead people, like dead loved ones. But secondly, it completely removes the justification or the idea that their sacrifice was not in vain, that their sacrifice was justified. Because you've got and disantagonized a force that was the only justification for you to say, okay, it's fine. He had to serve the country. He had to die. I'll accept it as that, right? This means that you're probably going to cause some form of civil unrest, at best, and at worst, you're going to undermine a government system due to the sheer fact that people no longer trust the state in not making controversial opinions or stances that would that justify the losses of their loved ones. With that, I'm very proud to propose. Thank you very oppose. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your speech, Leader of Opposition. Let's have the Deputy Prime Minister.
Am I audible, visible?
Yes, you're audible and visible.
Give me a time. Sorry, give me a minute to set up timer. Wait, just to make sure, you guys hear the background noises? Sorry, just give me a minute to communicate. Hi, my name is Amber from the Jihe. POIs in chat, please, and before chat real quick. Right, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. It is ironic that opposition say they want to take care of the victims, but completely ignore the fact that the war has two sides, and both sides, the victims, needs to be taken care of. They are the sides that are being blind here, chat. Hear what we have to say. Firstly, one strategic comment. They say that we are the sides that glorify villains. We beg to differ. We don't want to glorify anyone. In fact, this is why that we support that commemorating all sides of the war, right? No matter you're the winning side, the losing side, you're a civilian or a soldier or the families of that, you deserve to be commemorated. End of that. They are the side that are going to glorify one party. Note that our first proposition already asked the question, who are you going to commemorate on your side? No response. We tell you who is actually going to get commemorated. It's the victory, the side that actually gained victory, right? It's the side that actually won the war. They are the people that get to dictate the narrative. We're pointing to you how this is immoral. No responses. Further moving on into my other responses. Firstly, I want to quickly deal with the idea of propaganda. Listen to the examples. They give examples like, oh, China being being communist, Russian being communist and stuff like that. Know that all these are shallow ideas of propaganda and false accusations of, or like at least diminishing of what the country actually is about. There's so much nuances within the war that it's very crucial to shaping like people's mentality when it comes to meeting people from that country or having diplomatic relations. All these are things that opposition are clearly too blind to see through. That is precisely why we need to break down this propaganda, right? This is the propaganda is a trade-off that opposition have to defend, not proposition, because we are the side that actively takes it down. They are the side that sits there and do nothing. Second response is that they say, oh, we'll have a lack of patriotism because now you don't trust the government or whatever. Firstly, not true. You can still love your country without hating on others. I don't know why the only reason that you can love Malaysia is to like hate on like other countries by saying that like, oh, if the other country is bad, then only our country is good. You can also celebrate your country's national day. You can also celebrate your country winning the Olympics. You can also celebrate like Michelle Yeoh getting like an award, right? All these things are things that doesn't require you to hate on other countries. To love countries. I don't know why hate is the prerequisite to contrast love in this situation. But secondly, I also just want to quickly note that there's no trust to lose. You literally already won the war. They trust you more than ever, right? If anything. The problem now is that it doesn't matter. Also, we want to point out the fact that they assert that patriotism is good. We tell you if patriotism equals hating on other countries, this is a trade-off that we're willing to take because we'd rather have world peace than a group of people only willing to defend themselves. We'd rather have a group of people that take care of everyone rather than just themselves. This is a thing that we're clearly willing to take trade-off, right? Okay, they said that like they don't understand the analysis between our principal argument. I think our first proposition has been really clear. Here's what our argument is. Everyone deserves to live. No one deserves to die in war. Therefore, if you die in war, you put them in this situation. You put them into this situation without their consent. You deserve to give them reparations to the maximum of your ability. Simple as that. You cannot just say that like, oh, I don't know why reparations is not important. This is a principle. We don't have to prove the impact or the utility, but we tell you utility is still on our side, right? But note that this is a principle argument. That is to say, we tell you that it's immoral to ignore the pain and agony of these people who have died in war, but just because they're not the winning side, you ignore their pain. You say that one life is more worth living than the other simply because they have won the war. They have slayed more people and they just happen to be born at the right side of the war. Therefore, they deserve to live longer than the other. Therefore, they deserve to be recognized more than the other. We think this is something that's incredibly immoral that side opposition cannot say that this debate is totally about, right? You're not hearing our argument and you're not getting the impact of argument or you're not getting the layer of analysis of the argument. It's not an excuse to not engage. We hope for your more engagement from second op and third op, right? So that is our argument. We told you that the problem here is that only the winners are the ones that are able to literally like change the narrative of these, right? So they are able to antagonize the losing team. The losing teams are the one now not only getting stripped away their home, not only getting stripped away their family, but getting stripped away their voices to clarify. These are the people that are being forced to silence, being forced to be crowned as the villains. These are the people that will always be held on their side of the house panel. Please note that no engagement, then you cannot just credit them. All right, before I move on to substantive, sure.
Are you aware that even the losing sides of war hold their own war memorial? Are you aware of that?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Are you aware that even the losing side hold their own war memorials?
Yeah, okay. We're saying that everyone should commemorate everyone so that everyone feels loved within this community. And you acknowledge the fact that just because you win doesn't mean that the losing side does not deserve to live either. The concept is that simple. If you want memorials, like everyone can memorial themselves, yeah, sure. I don't see why like it's not exclusive, right? We can just do it on both sides. But we're saying that like just doing it here make it clear that we're supporting everyone with humanity as a whole. Two new substantive then the first one is just to build on the reconciliation argument that my first proposition has brought to you. The problem with this status quo is that we always have this us versus them mentality. They like to tell you that this is something that cannot be changed. We say that this is precisely whatever they're doing right now, sitting there and doing nothing. It's not going to fix the problem, right? We actively break this thing by telling people, hey, the winning side and the losing side and the casualties in between, they're all humans who don't want to be here. We recognize this as a regrettable choice. Let's heal from this and let's move on, right? So we are, because you know that status quo, they always have the urge to promote nationalism or whatever, which is whatever they want to bring up here, right? We tell you, usually these are like unnecessary and it shows a very unnuanced understanding on the war, right? Because people don't understand what is there in between the lines of what actually caused the war. They only understand, my side is the like heroes, their side is the villains, they deserve to die. They oh my god, they die, amazing, great. This is not something that we want to see. The negative impact is very simple. You get microaggressions and misunderstanding on their side of the house. Because you have to understand, like, these are things conflicts are very sensitive, right? It's sometimes it even comes in the terms of like religion or identity attack. So they're more irrational. Note that anger is a huge tool, which means that like more irrationality comes in this even more. But no, it's only on their side of the house where misunderstanding really fly past their head, right? Because they're unwilling to negotiate. So it can be as small as I refuse to cooperate, but it can be as huge as like I think more wars happen, right? So the thing is that we uniquely solve this because we promote the idea of even if you like I want this war, let's mourn together for our losses because we're one as a whole. This shows the beauty of the human's heart and in society, right? We promote empathy, love, and peace on our side. We promote working together. But third argument then on victim closure, because what do you see in status quo? Victims of the losing side being forced to commemorate the victories of their killers. If you're a minority living in the country, you go to the National Memorial, you see all these people glorifying the people literally stab your father to death. How would you feel that? If they want to talk about wanting to help the victims, we say you're cherry picking one side, but you're also cherry picking the least vulnerable side of the victims, right? We tell the victims are nuanced. The losing side also have victims. They also have families. These are people they also have to take care of. Oh, but they're going to be victims that will be forced to remember their traumatic past, like if after they win the war. Firstly, the whole thing of like framing them as a villains is literally the problem of unnuanced war understanding, which is a problem of opposition. But secondly, they are like the less vulnerable, comparatively less vulnerable victims, right? Because note that there are families on both sides. You have to take care of both sides. How do we solve this then? Everyone gets closure because you promote the idea that everyone deserves closure. Even if you lost this war, you still can go to the National Memorial and you can see that like at least my family is still somewhat a part of this. They would acknowledge the sacrifices of everyone, right? This promotes understanding. You're more willing to aid each other because now you're no longer having a us versus them mentality, right? So you no longer have to hear things like your father is a bad guy, you deserve to suffer, I hope your future generations suffer. These are things that you'll never hear on our side because the winner of the war and the loser of the war are equally all victims. You have to side with proposition.
Thank you for that speech, Deputy Prime Minister. Let's have the Deputy Leader of Opposition.
A few moments to set up my timer, please. Thank you.
Sure.
Am I audible and visible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. I'm second speaker of opposition. My pronouns are she, her. I prefer verbal POIs, please. And I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. As Maya Angelou once said, history, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again. Firstly, I'd like to start off my speech with some rebuttals. We challenged proposition's characterization of war memorials because losing countries have memorials as well to honor their own fallen soldiers. And it's not just the winning countries who have these memorials. Proposition also said that they're not glorifying everyone and just commemorating both sides, whereas our side is glorifying just our side. But if you put two sides of the war on one war memorial, it may give the image of moral equivalence where the actions and sequences of both sides are seen as equal, even though that it might not be the case. And government side keeps wanting to push the burden to government to say that we're only commemorating one side. Because let's put it this way, both sides have their own commemoration of their lost loved ones, and the argument mentioned is the same thing for the other. Yes?
So you're advocating for having like memorials for both sides. So you're advocating for proposition.
It's not putting both sides on one memorial. It's having both of the countries have their own memorials and to commemorate their own soldiers instead of putting both sides on one single memorial. Now, government assumes that one side gets forced to commemorate the other for some reason. If not, then I'm not sure why you would mention it in the first place if it's mutual for both sides. Regardless if they win or lose, both countries will have their own memorials. You want to say that you're promoting peace, but with centuries of indoctrination and innate hatred that can be seen, even if superficial, yet it's still very effective through retrospectives like the American Red Scare. You're not getting any peace even if you try to promote it. They also said that people who win the war are the ones with the authority to dictate moral direction. But as I've said, the losing countries have memorials as well to honor their fallen soldiers. So if you put the victors of the war on the memorial of a losing country, the public would obviously see the war memorial as a sign that the government is kind of honoring the enemy who vanquished their country, defeated them, murdered their own people. And so they would obviously have like a sort of resentment to whoever erected the war memorial because it puts their enemies on there. And the outcome of a conflict can be influenced by various factors like military strength or geopolitical circumstances, and it's essential to recognize that moral direction should not be solely determined by the victors. So imagine like Malaysians commemorating the Japanese. How controversial do you think that would be? We all know that the Japanese slaughtered and murdered thousands of us during the war. And so technically, if you erect a war monument to commemorate the Japanese, it will be extremely controversial because you are putting people who murdered our people, who raped our people, and who caused so much harm and so much pain to our people, and you're commemorating them on the National War Monument. They also said that it doesn't require you to hate other countries to love your own country, but a national war memorial that primarily focuses on the casualties and sacrifices of one's own forces does not imply hatred for other countries. Instead, it underscores the importance of preserving one's own national identity, heritage, and their own sacrifices made for their values and principles of the country. It also serves as a testament to the resilience and determination of a nation in the face of adversity without denigrating or promoting animosity towards other countries, so we're not criminalizing the other country anyway. They also said that everyone in war is a victim and they deserve to be commemorated. Well, that statement is true, but it's also important to differentiate between the roles and responsibilities of various actors involved, because in a conflict, there's always two parties with differing objectives and actions. By categorizing everyone as victims, we risk oversimplifying the complex dynamics and nuances of warfare, and so recognizing the distinct roles and responsibilities help to foster a more accurate understanding of the conflict and its consequences. Sorry. They also said that giving them reparations can be like an important part of addressing like historical injustices and promote reconciliation. But it's not necessarily the most effective or appropriate solution in all cases, because reparation involves like complex considerations such as determining eligibility and assess the extent of damages and ensuring the process is fair and just. They also said that it would promote the idea that both countries mourn the deaths and promote unity. However, the practical implementation of such an idea can be challenging because in most cases, the conflict may be rooted in deep-seated historical grievances and differing narratives, so it's very difficult to achieve a shared sense of mourning and unity by just erecting a war monument with both sides of the war on it. And it might inadvertently reinforce divisions and perpetuate animosities instead. Now I'll go into my argument on how government side achieves the opposite of peace. It perpetuates a cycle of blame because you have two sides on the same memorial and people have different perspectives on what caused the war. And so it reinforces historical grievances and perpetuates a cycle of blame, making it harder for nations or groups to move beyond the past and work towards peace. It also creates trauma for the victims and their families because you're honoring the people that murdered their friends, family, and children on the country's own war memorial. If you put yourself in their shoes, you'll feel intense hatred and grief. If you honor their murderers, it will obviously cause an uproar amongst the public because these enemies killed people who are extremely close to them. Imagine that you're a soldier and you're going through probably the most traumatic years of your life, seeing all your buddies around you die gruesomely from the enemy soldiers and the literal guts being spilled out of their bodies, and you being ravaged physically and mentally. You're forced to face all that bloodshed and gore during the war, and the only thing keeping you going is patriotism and the thought that you're fighting for your country. Then you see that your government is celebrating the heroes killing your buddies. They were the ones that caused this panic among civilians. They did not advocate for peace, but instead harm your country without empathy. And yet your government is putting them at the same level of honor and glory as your deceased brave friends who fought for your own country. And you would be absolutely livid in your perspective because you would feel like your sacrifice is not worth it at all. And so from this perspective, you can see that it causes civil unrest and distrust, which would cause further controversies and debate. It will also cause emotional distress to the families and the victims, because war memorials often serve as places of remembrance for those who have lost loved ones in conflicts, and the inclusion of casualties from all sides can evoke strong emotions and reopen wounds for victims' families, reminding them of their personal loss and the pain that they have endured caused by the enemy that is honored and commemorated on the country's own war memorial. And so it may serve as a potent trigger for grief and amplifies the emotional impact on those directly affected. And it causes a tension between honoring the individual experiences of victims and their families and the collective remembrance of the nation. And they might find it emotionally distressing to see their loved ones memorialized against the very individuals or groups they perceive as enemies. And it might also trigger the traumatic memories and leading to heightened emotional distress, anxiety, or symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder for the victims. And so they may question their own sense of patriotism and dedication to the country if they perceive that their sacrifices are not being honored or valued, and question whether their sacrifices are worth it, and that causes resentment towards their own country for honoring murderers. And even if proposition says that having two sides of the war on a national war memorial have effects of reconciliation, genuine reconciliation requires addressing historical grievances, acknowledging past injustices, and promoting understanding between conflicting parties. A national war memorial that includes both sides may not provide an adequate platform for this process. You need to actually interact with the other country and to reach reconciliation for this to actually work, not just erect a war memorial and declare reconciliation and a declaration of peace. I'll end my speech here. Thank you.
Thank you for your speech, Deputy Leader Opposition. Let's have the government vote. Government.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, my name is Ashraf. Your preferences verbally. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. In an increasingly polarizing world stemming from nationalism and us versus them mentalities, Ops wants you to remove the balance of focus, which creates division. They want you to entirely focus on just the winning side, rather than focusing on reconciling past victims of this phenomenon, past victims of war. Now, first of all, one strategic comment. Firstly, I want to note that the entire analysis is essentially a prerequisite towards any of our benefits, like any of the benefits that they want to claim. Sorry. So they want to claim stuff like what's that, reconciliation, all of that. You need to have our layers of analysis first before you can even actually get that. Now, more importantly, however, is that the entirety of Ops case hinges upon glorifying one party. They say the reason why they justify this is because they say it's insensitive to the people's country to glorify or commemorate the enemy soldiers and whatnot. But the problem with this is that war has all sides, right? It's not just so the losers too have widows, where their soldiers are also dying as well, but Op doesn't want to commemorate that because of stuff like patriotism, which I'll touch on later. But the main thing is these wars, they're all decided by the framings of these wars, they're all decided by the victors. The victims that are being commemorated are all by the victors. I'll take a POI later. So, for example, let us say Russia were to annex Ukraine. Do you think that Ukraine would have any power to commemorate their own victims? No, obviously not, because Ukraine doesn't even exist anymore. They have lost the war. Any Ukrainian soldiers then will literally lose any power to be able to commemorate themselves, to be able to uphold the principle of having dignity. They wouldn't even like in the worst case scenario, like prejudice would still be there for like descendants of those victims. Prejudice would still be there for people like the Ukrainians, for this example. And even if like we want to say like, let's say each victor, creates a memorial for everyone, which by the way is like you can't actually claim that, because by that point you're literally just agreeing with side proposition by saying that we need both sides to be commemorated in war. Okay, like even if we wanted to like create like memorials for each state, like we will still get the problem of the us versus them mentalities, right? Because when you're creating national memorials like for yourself, and every single country does that, what you're doing is you're still creating more intense nationalism, which can like create into us versus them mentalities, like, oh, we glorify our soldiers, this soldier is bad, this side is bad, we must always never forget that this side is bad. That's what you're gonna get. All right, I'll take your POI.
At which point in any one of your three speaker speech did you mention a solution to the so-called problem that the so-called you versus us versus you mentality that you mentioned?
Thank you very much. Okay, so the solution that we get from the like us versus them mentality is extremely simple. Like when we celebrate all sides, what we are doing is we're fostering acceptance. We are teaching our nations, like when every single nation commemorate all sides, we're teaching in each and every single one of those nations is that we should be more acceptable. We should be empathetic. We should not only forget what has been done to us, but also what we have done as well. Okay, and with this, we can it can allow for reconciliation that you wanted to happen to actually happen. You want world peace, we're gonna give you world peace, but you're gonna have to like accept our layers of analysis first. You cannot get whatever you want without claiming our layers of analysis. And also, like, what does this mean for the debate, right? Okay, so essentially all like has to frame, they have to prove how glorifying one side of the party can actually create a peaceful world for everyone to live in, and where all parties of the war will not be stripped of their dignity. That is what they essentially have to prove now. Now, going on to the clashes. Right now, there are two main clashes of the debate. The firstly is regarding principle of dignity, whether all sides should get principle of dignity, whether all sides should have their dignity, or whether it's just the country's citizens themselves, like the video example that the opposition tried to bring. Now, like I said before, they tried to say it was insensitive. But however, on our side, we say that it's much more insensitive for you to entirely ignore not even just the suffering of those victims, but the existence that those suffering even like happen in the first place. That's what we're trying to say here. Like, there are victims on each side of the war. There will be victims on all sides of the war. And if you choose to ignore on commemorating them, who else is going to give them like the principle of like dignity? Because the victors, they are essentially principally obliged to give them the dignity. Those who have killed you should at the very least give you dignity, should at the very least give reparations towards the descendants of who were affected by that war. People from like Iraq, people from Poland, they all deserve reparations from what has been done to them in the past. You can't just expect to invade a country, come out and expect everything to be fine and clean. No, you have to give reparations, you have to give support, and not only that, most importantly, you have to make sure that they aren't antagonized, because they aren't necessarily the evil ones. What kind of civilian is actually evil? I'll reject it. So they also say that our side doesn't give closure, but when in reality, when we're providing commemoration to everyone, we're also providing commemoration towards our own citizens as well. So that means that the widow that you were talking about are also gonna get closure from the death of their husband. There's still that husband's death is still gonna get commemorated, just as how the other soldier who was essentially just a pawn within this war, they're too going to get commemorated. But then what we want is just for people to see other people as human beings and not just you're bad, very good. Now, on the final clash regarding world peace and nationalism, they say patriotism is needed for a country to run, right? Well, I say this is not true because, for example, let's take Nazi Germany, for example. They were fascists, and fascists were literally taking patriotism to like an extreme level, yet they still failed, you know? And it's not because like they weren't patriotic enough, they were already extremely patriotic, way too patriotic, in fact. But still, their government fell, right? So it's not just because like oh no, nationalism equals like government fall. And also finally, most importantly, we say it is better to trade off a group of selfish people, such as within each of these countries, for world peace. We want to build a culture of tolerance where we can work together and finally achieve world peace, which is why side proposition supports this mission. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you for that speech, government whip. Let's have the opposition whip.
Hello, pronouns he, him, preferably two POIs in my speech and verbally, and starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. So panel, notice how throughout the entire debate, the one side has refused to engage on even one of our things. Like, for example, have they ever engaged on our second speaker's characterization challenge? No, they have not. Have they ever engaged with us pointing out that they lose out on patriotism? No, they have not. Have they ever simply just engaged on why they don't achieve peace? No, they have not. Throughout all three speeches, they have regurgitated the same exact phrases about the earth versus them mentality, or about how they promote peace, but they have given out no clear mechanism, no clear analysis, or no clear reason on why any of their claims are true. Hello panel, today I'll be dissecting the entire debate and prove why we win this and prove why we win this debate. So first of all, in the PMC, they gave out non-exclusive harm and benefits about having empathy and healing. How does empathy and healing not exist in the status quo? For example, the active countries, Germany, Japan, and Italy. Like, how are these three countries not extremely just welcomed on the global stage? They are. Healing exists on our status quo. How does it not exist? How does your side have more healing than our side? Second of all, how does your side stop the earth resistance mentality? They have not explained this at all and have refused to engage with my first and second speaker's point. Now moving on. They haven't given out enough analysis to prove their claim true. They have given out unclear arguments. They have given out no impact, and they were contradictory throughout the entire debate. In sense that, for example, if in their world another Holocaust happened, their side would have to celebrate the people who defended the Holocaust, the quote unquote another Holocaust, in their world, in their countries, memorials, despite everything. But government still doesn't want to concede it. They want to have a soft stance for absolutely no reason at all. And they want to co-opt all their benefits without claiming any of their harm, and don't want to even trade off, and are being extremely uncharitable. Then DPM, he did not give out any way, did not give out any impact, and like they didn't even have a clear link to their first speaker, and didn't even like prove their point true. Now on the web speech, with the most giant problem of having characterization come out, like characterization and new material coming out on the third speech. So, like, panel, just please discredit, just by this alone, please discredit like what most of the things that government would have stated. Now, moving on to our side. So on our side of the world, we prioritize the vulnerable, innocent, slash those who have suffered through war-torn bloodshed. Our metrics here are vulnerability and likelihood. Now, moving on to some POI. So, now moving on a few statements in sense that, considering that they have not dealt with the characterization challenge, we will automatically assume that they have conceded and that the losing side countries also hold war memorials. Also, throughout the entire debate, they have talked about how they foster acceptance and celebrate all sides. First of all, they have no explanation on how this outweighs the undermining on patriotism as given out by my first speaker. And despite us having layers and layers of analysis, rating,
Do you think that the citizens are the most vulnerable? Please.
They are, but your side doesn't help in the sense that even in your side, because they also have war memorials, you also celebrate the winning side, and the winning side killing your own losing side people. Think about it. You don't achieve the same effect. This is what I was going to say later on, but continuing on. Regarding on your side, celebrating all sides on the war and fostering acceptance, we have layer and layers of analysis, framing and multiple examples on why this would be untrue. And by this alone, I would tell the judge to discredit all their points and your entire case on this. Now moving on. It's a highly, just to repeat for a bit, it's a highly sensitive thing that the country's citizens are trying to recover from. If you remind them of the people that cause so much distress in your country and completely wreck your life and your home, you would obviously cause a huge uproar in public and completely destroy their patriotism. If each country honors their own side with your own war memorial separately, it wouldn't cause this conflict even in the slightest, because you're just appreciating the sacrifices the soldiers of your own country. And you're going to give the citizens closure and can you give your own citizens closure? Now moving on to a few clashes. So does government, first of all, the class, does government side improve peace? Now, by the government side, by will of not a yeah.
Can a losing country that was annexed create its own memorial?
Huh? Can an annexed country? What, like,
Can
first of all,
losing
why
country
couldn't
that
it?
was
Why couldn't it? Second of all, why does it matter? Like, also, third of all, it doesn't matter. Okay, now it's what? Oh, okay, never mind. I'll just move on. Now, does it improve peace? So on Gulf side, they have talked about how they would their earth, quote unquote, earth versus them mentality would go away. This, first of all, this again is it explained. Second of all, our LO and DLO have proved why this is completely untrue, and thus this should be discredited. Second of all, they talk about how they wouldn't have more war in their side. But first of all, war is caused by the incentives of their leaders. You have not proven why the memorials are going to change the incentives of these leaders going to wars. Third of all, they talk about how they promote cooperation. How? You not explain any of how you've never even explained how you promote cooperation. Also, how does cooperation not exist on our side? For example, again, the three axis countries now being extremely cooperative on the global stage. And then they talk about the principle of dignity, which, by the way, only came out on the third speech. So again, this is just entirely discredited. And then they talk about how on our side, we only glorify one side when this is really untrue. And then they talk about how the country, an example of the active country failing, that therefore not needing countries not needing patriotism to run, which is what? How? What correlation here? What correlation is there regarding patriotism and the Asian countries falling? The countries fell for a different reason, but not patriotism, okay? And if you think about it, like it's not true in the sense that other countries that are not the Axis countries in the Second World War also had a lot of patriotism. Please explain. Now, moving on. In terms of like our side, we have stated how their side would not have peace in the sense that we have stated how it has achieved the opposite impact in our second speaker. And by will of government side not engaging, we already automatically went out on this point. Therefore, we believe that we already won this first clash. And in the second clash, in terms of clashes of principle, government side has two clashes if you'll be more charitable. They have the clash of principle of victimhood and of dignity, but they state no impact. They don't state why it outweighs our impact, our principle, and therefore, I believe that this should already be discredited. Second of all, on our side, we have talked about the principle of democracy on our first speaker, but again, considering that government side has done nothing to challenge it and hasn't challenged on why their side fails to uphold the principle of democracy, and our side proving why the principle of democracy is extremely important in the country's running. I believe that we already won this debate, and proud to oppose. I end my speech here. Thank you.
Thank you for that speech, opposition. Let's have the opposition reply.
All right, last check. Am I audible and am I visible?
Yes, you're audible as well.
All right, in that case, I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Sitting here listening to the main hall turn into a war zone has really made me understand what it is like to be fighting an opponent who's gassing my comrades violating the Geneva Convention. All right, I'll be doing one simple thing in today's speech. I'll be talking about the main issues of government case and why their case fundamentally falls due to it. 3 things here: their analysis, secondly, their engagement, thirdly, they take too high a burden. Firstly, their analysis. The analysis until the third speaker remains unclear to the House as how their mechanisms translate to these impacts. Let's look at a few examples from what Prime Minister said. Prime Minister said, right? They tell us that they fulfill like this peace and like this principle of life and like discrimination on and like the so-called discrimination due to war propaganda on their side naturally disappears because somehow they maintain this image of equality, right? First off, it is left completely unclear how, firstly, peace is achieved in the first place due to a commemorative event. What is the incentive of the leaders? Like, for example, what are the incentives of like world leaders to stop suddenly doing wars just because like they all of a sudden began celebrating other soldiers, right? The second thing is they tell us that like people aren't as likely to discriminate each other because they have peace. But again, the same thing, right? This isn't exactly concretely proven. If government was to tell us that, oh, we have reparations that serve to bridge the gap, then first off, commemorate, as my second speaker has already stated, commemoration does not serve as enough reparation insofar as to say that war is destructive enough to cause billions in damage, hundreds of thousands of millions in lives, and you're using commemoration as a reparation tactic. I think that second and third, and my second and third speaker were accurate to point out that it's not relevant to say that. The analysis is not enough. And we simply don't buy it, right? Secondly, is the point of engagement. They fundamentally fail to engage with a comparative and characterization. They continue to tell us that the victor of wars will detect whose side is celebrated. Notice that they posit this to us. They posit this unproven characterization as telling us that if Russia annexed Ukraine, Ukraine will no longer, and so they wouldn't be able to like commemorate their soldiers, right? Like, first off, this is purely untrue in the sense where Ukraine no longer exists. There no longer exists a second side. The second side has been assimilated with the first side. Let's look at examples where there really were both sides. Let's look at the American and Japanese war, right? Like the Pacific Theater during World War II. Americans celebrated, they commemorated their soldiers when they won, but so did the Japanese. They celebrated the loss of their people. The emperor did call out to weep and to celebrate, not celebrate, but rather commemorate their efforts in the war. And like the what was it called again? Like the torch of peace that was put in Hiroshima is a clear symbol to that, right? They also don't engage at all to our second speaker argument about how their side is more likely to cause the opposite of peace, which is even more hatred. And there's no engagement at all for that. So I'm quite sure that second argument still stands, right? But thirdly is the issue where government takes too high a burden. They're telling us that they're able to solve world injustice and attain world peace with one flimsy commemoration of opposition, of like opposing forces in the victors, right? You're telling us that the incentive to be profitable and the incentive of people to get what they want, to be greedy, which is a universal evil that I think can be agreed on, can be solved by can be somehow solved by parading around and saying, oh, we're sorry our guys died, we're sorry these guys died as well. It's completely, it wasn't explained clearly as to why X translates to Y in the first place. But second of all, the relativity of how this manifests is also left unproven in all three of their speeches. With this, I'm very proud. With this, I've never been prouder to oppose. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that speech of reply to end the novice finals in high school. Let's have the reply.
Hello, am I audible and visible?
Yes, yes, you are.
Okay, give me a minute. Set my timer. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Why is my death less important than another just because I was born in another country? A question that I've been asking them this whole time, no response. Before I go into two clashes, firstly, 3 strategic comments. First, they think they can get away with saying that, oh, we want memorials, just your country holds your own memorial. That's it. Wow, firstly, that you're literally supporting side proposition because that's what we're arguing for, where everyone has memorials for everyone. But secondly, I want to point out that losing side does not get a chance to hold a memorial. When Russia take over the lands of Ukraine, do you think Ukraine actually still have the authority to build a memorial on the land that we once owned? When like Turkey and Cyprus just like in war, do you think that Cyprus actually gets to build a memorial? We tell you that these people literally do not get a chance to have a memorial. Nothing of their benefits materialize. Second, strategic comment. We never wanted to glorify. We want to treat everyone equally. Note that the glorification happens on their sides of the house because they are the ones that are picking and choosing who they want to actively showcase and actively like commemorate, right? That's a problem they have to solve on their side. Thirdly, the problem in the stakeholder analysis, because they are talking about it as if only victims of the winning side deserve to live. We posit a more vulnerable stakeholder here, which is the victims of the losing side, because not only now they don't have a memorial, they've been stripped away from their homes, stripped away from their land, stripped away from their family, and now they're going to strip away from like even like being the dignity to being recognized that they've been sacrificed. We think it's a very insensitive to ignore them. Two clashes then. Firstly, which side aids the victims? No, not only just the victims on the winning side that they want to protect because they're like so like fragile, right? We're talking about victims on both sides because we told you that maximizing reparations is important for both sides. They cannot just act like we're running a parallel case because they only want allow one side to get the reparations while completely ignoring the other, right? We tell you that the losing side is suffering. The principle applies to them the most. They're the most vulnerable. They deserve the most maximum form of reparations, right? Opposition is being principally inconsistent here. When they actively ignore a side, they don't click to claim the benefit of wanting to help victims, right? Because we tell you the minute when you choose whose life is more worth remembering just because of which country they are born, we tell you this is inherently messed up. They say that, oh, but what's the impact of the argument? Precisely, this is a principal argument. It doesn't matter if it actually materials any sort of impact. We tell you this is messed up. No one's life is more premium than the other. You don't get to get away by saying insensitive things like this. We are the only side that prioritizes both sides, make reparations to both sides. We take this clash. Second clash then, in terms of world peace of nationalism, it's so ironic that the POI we receive in government just shows that how much they're not listening to our entire case. We told you that acceptance and empathy is a prerequisite to having world peace, right? Yeah, sure, we're not going to be able to stop all wars like what they say. Radically charged wars is still going to happen, but we're able to reduce the microaggression. We cannot solve all wars. We solve some, you solve none. We pause a problem in status quo, where world peace is already rekindled by the nationalism and propaganda that opposition so wants to support. And all these are being paused because they are promoting this idea of having misunderstanding of the war, of having unnuanced understanding of the war and the conflict. We tell you the only way to solve it is to acknowledge that everyone is a victim and no longer choosing sides. You're no longer making us versus them. It's a humanity problem. Let's look through this. This is a regrettable choice. Let's figure out what went wrong and let's heal and move on together. It's only through having this mindset we are able to actually have reconcile and actually move on from here. They want to say nationalism is good. The responses here. Firstly, it's non-exclusive. I already told you why you can love your country without hating another. Secondly, this is non-contentious because you already just won the war. Any issues about losing trust in the government is not going to be present because literally the government led you to win the war. Thirdly, we told you, we reported that this is not an a priori good. Nationalism is not an a priori good. The way here is simple. If the nationalism comes at the expense of world peace and harmony with other groups of people, we say this is not worth it. No, this is a value judgment debate, not an actor debate, right? Even if we don't manage to reconcile, we lose victims. Our worst case is your status quo. You have no positive merit on your side of the house. You are the resistance of humans, from being like their self-humans, empathetic and kind again.
All right, thank you so much, everyone. That concludes the finals for the novice finals for MNWSDC. Thank you so much for that wonderful debate, everyone. You may cross the house. I would ask my panelists and my different panelists to please go to a breakout room. Can OC please open a breakout room for us?
Nice debate, guys.
Thank you for the debate.
Okay. So that concludes the debate. Can I have OC team to please open a breakout room in Zoom? Maybe breakout room 1 or 2. All right. So can we please go to room 1? So we're panelists and I, let's go to room 1.